decline of Islam in Cyprus. Before I actually get into the actual history of it, I'd like to just decipher the title, if you will. When we're talking about a decline, that means we're talking about something that was once prevalent and very common, that has become something very rare and uncommon today. And when we're talking about the decline of Islam, just to make things clear, we're not talking about all of the Muslims in Cyprus leaving Cyprus. We're not talking about all of the Muslims in Cyprus changing their religion. We're talking about the Muslims in Cyprus not representing their religion or not openly demonstrating their religion as much today as they used to in the past. And obviously, I don't know most people in this room, so some people might come from religious backgrounds, some people might come from non-religious backgrounds. So when I say the word Islam, many people will get different ideas in their head. Somebody might hear the word Islam and think, you know, a bunch of old men with long white beards sitting in the mosque going Allahu, Allahu all day. And then other people will think maybe a guy with a suicide bomb vest jumping onto a train shouting Allahu Akbar and blowing up. Okay, let's get rid of all of these false ideas of Islam. Let's get them out of our heads. And let's talk about Islam as a systematic culture. So we're talking about a time where it was completely normal for a Turkish Cypriot woman in Cyprus to walk outside her house covered from head to toe in a white burqa and white niqab, and nobody would say anything to it. It was seen as something very normal. It was very normal for Turkish Cypriots to be Hafiz of the Quran, to go to the mosque to pray 5 times a day. And this was part of our culture, everyday culture. But nowadays, unfortunately, when we get the one odd Turkish Cypriot that demonstrates any form of Islam, they're often faced with a lot of problems from their own family, from their own people. And we're going to just discuss about how Islam came to being prevalent in society to the state that it is in today. Now, just a little bit about the history of Islam in Cyprus. Islam in Cyprus is as old as Islam itself. Islam in Cyprus first arrived in the year 648, Common Era, about 40 years after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, passed away. And it was brought to Cyprus by Arabs, not by Turks. The third caliph of the Islamic Empire, Hazreti Osman, who was also a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, he sent a conquest to Cyprus in that year. And we have evidence of this conquest and Arab settlements all over Cyprus. Now, I hope I can see some people with pen and paper. It's good to take notes, because this information is not something you're going to learn from your little Cyprus Tepsi that has that little historical timeline on there. Okay, this is real knowledge here. So, even though that little timeline shows Byzantines and then was it Richard the Lionheart, Lusignans, Venetians, all of that rubbish, they somehow seem to miss out that for 300 years, between the 7th century and the 10th century, Cyprus, either completely or partially, was part of a greater Islamic empire called the Umayyads, or the Emeviler, as they say in Turkish. So we have, for example, those of you who know Cyprus well, Çatalköy, near Girne, we have Hazreti Ömer Türbesi, where we have 7 or 8 Arab, 7 Arab martyrs from that conflict who are buried in Hazreti Ömer Türbesi. More famous we have in Larnaca, on the Greek side, we have Ala Sultan Tekkesi. That's the burial ground of the auntie of the Prophet Muhammad, in the Harem. We also have this very common belief amongst the Turkish Cypriots. And in Apostolos Andreas in Karpaz, which is now a church, there's a grave in the grounds of that church, and it's commonly believed that that grave belongs to a Sahaba, companion of the Prophet Muhammad, called Urwa bin Sabit. And this is due to evidence of Arab writing on the walls around his grave. We also have Arab names in Cyprus. Kantara, for example, in North Cyprus, is an Arab name. Arapköy as well also has some kind of Arab background in their history, so that's where it gets the name from. Also, even after Cyprus was taken away from the Muslim Empire, Muslims still remained in Cyprus, usually as slaves to the Lusignans or the Venetians. Like, for example, in Episcopi, near Limassol, on the Greek side, we have evidence of African agriculture. So this shows that there were Muslims in Cyprus, even before the Ottoman Turks. There were Turkish Muslims as well in Cyprus before the Ottoman Turks. These were called Memluks. They were from Egypt. I don't know if you've heard of the Memluk Empire. They were Turks from Egypt that used Cyprus as a military base in their expeditions to the Aegean Sea. But the official Ottoman era in Cyprus began in 1570, 1571, in that era. So obviously I hope you're taking notes because it's a lot of information to take in, right? And the first thing that the Muslim Turks did, Ottoman Turks did, was Catholic churches that were left abandoned were turned into mosques. So for example, Selemiye Cami in Lefkoşa, Lala Mustafa Pasha Cami in Mausa. These used to be Catholic churches. The Ottomans didn't touch the Greek churches because before the Ottomans arrived, there were Catholic Italians, the Venetians, and Greek Orthodox, Greek Cypriots basically. But because the Greek Cypriots had their own churches, they never used to go to the Catholic churches. So when the Italians left, these churches were left empty, and the Turks basically turned them into mosques. So a lot of people would say things like, oh yeah, what we did was wrong, turning churches into mosques. Or if we didn't turn them into mosques, they would probably become ruins. So I believe that we did the right thing there. Also, we made our own mosques. For example, on the Greek side of Lefkoşa, we've got Bayraktar Cami. We've also got Arab Ahmed and Turunçlu Mosque on the Turkish side. We had many tekkes as well. Tekkes, they used to raise basically sheikhs, mullahs, dervishes. So it was very common for Turkish Cypriots to basically go to these tekkes and have their children raised in these tekkes, and they would turn out as Islamic scholars. This was when Islam was basically peaking in Cyprus. The decline began in 1878, which happened to be the year that Sultan Abdulhamid Han II leased Cyprus over to the British. And as brother Mustafa said, Sultan Abdulhamid Han, he used to exile anti-Islamic extremists, we could say, or radicals, to Cyprus, because he wanted them out of the Ottoman Empire, so they would wind up going to Cyprus. The famous one, most famous one was, I wouldn't call him anti-Islamic, but maybe more pro-secular, Mehmet Kemal, who had a prison in Mausa. But most Turkish Cypriots saw these people as radicals. They didn't really take them seriously. But nonetheless, their propaganda began in this time, in Kıbrıs Gazetesi, newspapers like that. Their propaganda would be spread. However, all Turkish Cypriot Derneğis, this is probably the main part of my little talk, they used to belong to an organization called the EVKAF. I don't know if you've heard of that. The EVKAF is basically a plural term Vakıf Foundation. It was an umbrella organization for all Turkish Cypriot foundations. That includes charities, schools, mosques, tekkes, lands, basically every single property that belonged to the Turkish Cypriots, public property, was part of this EVKAF. One of the first things the British did when they arrived was they did an audit of this EVKAF, and they found that there was some cases of corruption, supposedly, and this gave them an excuse to approach Sultan Abdulhamid Han, and they made an offer to co-manage the EVKAF. So there'd be two managers. One manager would be elected by the British, and another manager would be elected by the Ottomans. So between the British and the Ottomans, this was agreed to. However, in 1903, we're becoming a bit more chronological now. 1903, the Turkish Cypriots, by that point, were split into two different political parties, main parties. One of them were pro-Ottomans. These were people that wanted Cyprus to rejoin the Ottoman Empire. The other ones were pro-British. These were the ones that were happy with the English colonization of the island. They were happy to live as British subjects. So what would happen was the Ottomans would usually elect a pro-Ottoman person to lead the EVKAF. The British would elect one of their own little puppets to lead the EVKAF as well. So in 1903, the British chose a man, write this down, Musa İrfan Bey. Musa İrfan Bey became the British representative of the EFCAF in 1903, and then in 1911 he was actually put up for general elections to lead the entire Turkish Cypriot people. And the person who was running against him, write this name down as well, it's a very important name, was Ziya Efendi. Ziya Efendi was like the pro-Ottoman candidate. Musa İrfan Bey was a pro-British candidate. But because Musa İrfan Bey was one of the heads of the EFCAF, and he had all the power, all the access to all of the Turkish Cypriot properties, what he actually did was he would bribe people to vote for him by giving out EFCAF properties, lands, to people in return for votes. So in 1911, because of this, the EFCAF in general, all of the foundations, suffered great financial losses. So a lot of the Turkish Cypriot schools, education went down, the quality of the mosques went down, the land, everything just went down. Economically it was terrible for the Turkish Cypriots. And this left a lot of Turkish Cypriot villages in very difficult situations. So at this point the Greek Cypriots were becoming richer as well. So they would actually bribe many Turkish Cypriots to become Christian. And in this book here, we have a list of villages which are now considered to be Greek Cypriot villages, but they're actually Turkish Cypriot villages. But because they became Christian, they are now considered to be Greek. So I'm just going to quickly read the list. The villages that became completely Greek: Korfi, Lanya, Adihona, Monagru, Doro, Unari, Trimiklini, Limnet, Vavla, Ayos, Anglisia, Vavatsinia. The ones that became partially Christian: Milya, Irinya, Shahi, Yukarı Civirya, Aya Toroto, Girit Marot, Aya Merkur, Fasulla. So we have evidence of this. Just to continue, obviously the EFCAF started suffering. Turkish Cypriot institutes started going down. In 1914, the British and the Ottomans turned against each other. This resulted in the Çanakkale War. So Britain, as a punishment for the Ottomans, they decided to declare Cyprus as an official colony. And they basically gave Turkish Cypriots a choice. Either they remain in Cyprus and accept British citizenship, or they reject British citizenship and remain as Ottomans, but they have to leave the island. So about 8,000 Turkish Cypriots left the island and went to Turkey. That was about 1/5 of our population. We lost 1/5 of our population there. And after that, the pro-Ottoman party political agenda suffered great losses because all of their voters were gone. There you go, 8,000 Turkish Cypriots have now left the island. And the British started taking advantage of their newfound power over the pro-Ottoman camp. They started silencing pro-Ottoman imams and leaders such as Imam Nuri Efendi, who was put in prison. Ziya Efendi was forced to retire. Muhammad Zeki Efendi. These guys were pushed to the side. And they also seized complete control of the EFCAF. They no longer recognized the Ottoman elected representative. Obviously by 1924 was it? There was no more Ottoman Empire to speak of, so there was no more pro-Ottoman leader of the EFCAF. And also the Mufti of Cyprus was always considered to be the leader of the Turkish Cypriot community, both religious and political. What the British did was they abolished that position. They elected their own fatwa emini, who would give fatwas according to British interests. And when the Turkish Cypriots tried to elect their own mufti again, the British wouldn't recognize this mufti. In 1930, I believe, Ahmed Said was elected to be the mufti. But then within 1 year, he wound up leaving his job and he became a worker for the British government. So that wasn't very successful. So move on quickly. In 1932, this is actually a very useful bit of information. In 1932, an Ilahiyat faculty, an Islamic theology faculty, was opened in Cyprus. but it wasn't very popular. In 15 years they only produced 8 graduates, unfortunately. And also the Islamic education started to suffer in Cyprus as well, because in the 1920s the British basically took on Turkish Cypriot teachers as government subjects. They would be paid by the government. And previously all teachers used to get paid by the EFKAF. And because the EFKAF was a religious foundation, the teachers also used to be imams. But when the British employed teachers on the government payroll, because it was better money, most teachers chose to take the government job. So there was a decrease of teachers working for the EFKAF, a decrease of imams in the island, a decrease of people who are able to teach Islam properly in the island. Also, we could say that when the Ottoman Empire finished in Turkey and the secular Kemalist Republic was formed in Turkey, the Turkish Cypriots, obviously, they've lost their pro-Ottoman political camp, so it has to be replaced by something. So it was replaced by a pro-Kemalist political agenda, a pro-secular agenda. So now there's 2 camps in Cyprus, pro-British, pro-Kemalist. So the pro-Kemalists, they were more popular with the Turkish Cypriots themselves, and they were the ones that were being elected as leaders. They were the ones that were enforcing laws from Turkey. They were basically copycatting Turkey. And when Turkey banned the Ezan in Arabic, in, I believe it was 1933, the Turkish Cypriots also did the same thing. So until like the 1970s actually, you could hear the Turkish Ezan in Cyprus. Most imams, they complied to this. But Sheikh Nazim, if you've heard of him, he didn't comply to this. He would go around the mosques reading the Azan in Arabic. However, he was actually arrested. He had 114 cases put against him, and he was put into prison. However, by the late 1950s, Adnan Menderes became the head of Turkey. He changed the law, and because of the law change, Sheikh Nazim was later released. In 1956, I'm almost finished. 1956, the British decided that they no longer want to stay in Cyprus, so they arranged like a power transfer from the British to the Turkish Cypriots. So they decided to release the EFKAF properties back to the Turkish Cypriots, and they also decided to give the Turkish Cypriots the right to elect their own mufti. However, by this point, the Turkish Cypriots no longer have any inclination towards Islam. They elect their own mufti, called Dana Efendi, but he was strictly told by Dr. Fazıl Gücük, the leader of the Turkish Cypriots at the time, to stay out of politics. And the only time when he was allowed to interfere in politics was when he was giving a fatwa that was for the benefit of the Kemalist political agenda. So by 1960, the Turkish Cypriots were completely secularized. In 1962, the famous Mevlevi Tekke in Lefkoşa was closed down and turned into a museum. And you could say in 1974, when the peace operation happened and Turkey came and saved the Turkish Cypriots from Greek Cypriot violence, it was good that they saved us, but at the same time, they officially brought their secular system. So after that point, religious education in school started waning until it was completely finished. And in fact, North Cyprus today is one of the few countries in the world that doesn't have religious education as part of the curriculum. However, the past year has seen a slight revival. In 2011, last year, an Ilahiyat faculty was opened in Cyprus. Also they opened the Imam Hatip, so these are like Islamic theology schools. At the moment they're working on opening a Kulliya. A Kulliya is basically an Islamic library and research center. So there is a slight revival, but there are some groups in Cyprus that are trying to make it out as if this is a division between Turkish Cypriots and Turkish migrants from Turkey. They try to make out as if Turkish migrants from Turkey are the religious camp and Turkish Cypriots have got nothing to do with religion. Well, I'm proof of that being wrong because I'm a Turkish Cypriot and I'm in Turkey studying Islamic theology, so it doesn't really make sense to me personally. But that's basically a brief history of how we came from being religious to very secular people today. I'd like to thank you all for listening. Even though this was a small event, I believe it's a very important event because the fact that we're all here shows that we believe that this is something that needs to be discussed. And for those of you who can read Turkish, I really would recommend these two books, especially this one, Kıbrıs'ta İslami Kimlik, Davası by Hüseyin, Mehmet, Ateşin. This has got very good references to do with this subject. This is another book called Kıbrıs'ta Rumlaştırma, Hareketleri by Mustafa, Haşim, Altan. And if you can't read Turkish, I recommend this book in English called Christians and Muslims in Ottoman Cyprus by Ronald Jennings. So you can find this in the British Library, for example. You can order it from the internet.